Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geopolitical Pulse. Thank you for watching or listening to the podcast. What if the United States suddenly stopped supporting Israel tomorrow? No military aid, no emergency weapons shipments, no missile defense backup, no diplomatic shield. Would Israel be forced to change course? Could it continue fighting on multiple fronts? Or would the entire balance of power in the Middle East shift overnight? Today, we're breaking down exactly what could happen, from Israel's air force and missile defenses to Iran, Hezbollah, and the future of America's most important alliance in the region. But before we begin, I want to hear from you. If the U.S. cut off military aid tomorrow, would Israel become more secure, less secure, or would nothing really change? Drop your opinion in the comments right now. There are strong arguments on every side, and this is one of those debates where every perspective matters. And if you enjoy deep geopolitical analysis without the headlines and hype, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who follows Middle East affairs. Now let's examine the scenario that could change the region forever.
Yeah, it's a massive scenario to unpack.
It really is. And to actually answer that question, we're pulling from, well, a stack of recent defense policy papers, some really interesting analyses from the Cato Institute, and just the latest geopolitical updates to understand the absolute mechanics of this alliance.
Right. You really have to look at the money, the munitions, and this is key, the invisible political architecture that holds it all together.
Exactly. So where do we start?
Well, we have to start by looking at the sheer volume of the supply chain. Because, the geostrategic implications of this whole scenario, they're entirely rooted in the logistics.
Logistics, okay.
Yeah. If you sever this lifeline, you are basically unspooling decades of established military doctrine. And to understand what happens the day after a cutoff, we first have to visualize the scale of what's currently flowing across the Atlantic.
Let's lay out those numbers just to give everyone listening a sense of that scale. Based on the latest info, over the past 3 years alone, the U.S. has provided roughly $12.5 billion in supplemental military aid. And that is stacked directly on top of the usual baseline, which is $3.8 billion every single year.
Yeah, it's an astronomical amount of money. But we aren't just talking about wire transfers here. This translates into physical weight.
Oh, wow. How much weight are we talking?
We're looking at roughly 90,000 tons of military equipment and munitions transferred.
90,000 tons? That's hard to even picture.
It's a staggering logistical bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a constant rotation of heavy cargo planes delivering everything from joint direct attack munitions, which are what guide bombs, to precise targets, to standard 155 millimeter artillery shells.
Right.
And even down to the highly specialized replacement parts that you need to just keep a modern Air Force flying day in and day out.
So it's not just like an emergency reserve sitting around.
No, exactly. This rapid influx of weapons isn't sitting in a warehouse as some static defense. It's the precise component that enables their operational readiness.
So it's kind of like ripping the high-pressure fuel line out of a high-performance sports car, right?
That's a great way to look at it, yeah.
The car doesn't instantly cease to be a car, and the engine doesn't just explode. But it fundamentally cannot run at redline anymore.
And right now, they are running that engine at redline across 3 distinct tracks simultaneously. You've got Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran.
Right. A true multi-front war.
Exactly. And that kind of ambitious campaign requires an absolutely massive burn rate of munitions.
Yeah.
The U.S. supply line is, well, it's the only thing keeping the fuel tank full while the accelerator is pressed to the floor.
Oh.
Without it, you're looking at an immediate, system-wide failure of offensive momentum.
So if that fuel line gets cut, their strategic calculus has to change overnight. And some of the latest analyses, like from the Cato Institute, suggest that cutting this aid essentially removes the American Rescue Guarantee.
Right.
But wait, I struggle to buy that completely. I mean, if you're listening to this, you probably know that they have a massive, highly advanced domestic defense industry.
Oh, for sure. They literally invented the Iron Dome.
Exactly. They manufacture their own tanks, their own assault rifles. So if the U.S. cuts them off, why wouldn't they just ramp up their own domestic factories, rely on their own tech, and just keep going without Washington?
Well, it really comes down to the brutal math of industrial scale versus domestic production capacity.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, yes, they have world-class engineering and a formidable defense sector. They can design a brilliantly advanced missile interceptor, right?
Right.
But designing a weapon and mass-producing it at the scale required for a multi-front war, those are 2 entirely different realities.
Ah, I see.
When you're fighting a war of attrition, your defense industry needs massive supply chains, raw materials, manufacturing pipelines. And a nation of that size simply cannot sustain that alone at maximum output.
So the cracks don't show up in the quality of their military, but in the bottom of their stockpiles.
Exactly. It triggers a massive domino effect, and it's totally driven by scarcity. Take the recent reports of dwindling stockpiles for missile interceptors, for example.
Right, because Iran proved recently that it's willing to strike directly in retaliation for actions in Lebanon.
Yeah. So put yourself in the shoes of a military planner there.
Right.
If the U.S. administration suddenly pulls its guarantee of resupply, you face a terrifying math problem.
A math problem.
You have a finite number of interceptors left in your warehouses. You know your domestic factories can only produce, say, a handful each week, but your adversaries can fire hundreds of cheap drones and ballistic missiles in a single afternoon.
Oh, wow. So you can't spend a $50,000 interceptor in Lebanon today if you might need it to defend Tel Aviv tomorrow.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which means a severe and immediate contraction has to happen. Under that immense pressure, the calculus shifts from expansion to just straight survival.
They have to pull back.
They do. Without the U.S. providing that safety net to backstop those broader regional policies, leadership would likely conclude that continuing the war in Lebanon simply isn't worth the existential risk to their home front. They'd be forced to abandon wars abroad and shrink their focus strictly to defending their own immediate territory, which includes maintaining control in Gaza and the West Bank. The capacity to project power across the Middle East just evaporates.
That's a huge shift, but, if military isolation is the immediate threat that forces a nation to pull back to its borders, diplomatic isolation is what makes that retreat permanent, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because military hardware is only half the equation in this alliance. The U.S. also provides this invisible armor on the world stage. Without American diplomatic support, they'd have virtually no shield against international blowback.
Yeah, that diplomatic cover is the geopolitical permission structure that allows them to operate.
Like at the UN?
Exactly. In institutions like the United Nations Security Council, the U.S. veto is a wall. It stops crippling resolutions. Without that wall, you aren't just facing strongly worded letters.
What are you facing?
You're facing the immediate threat of international sanctions, global arms embargoes from European allies, and severe economic isolation.
Wow. Which means the diplomatic isolation could be just as paralyzing as running out of artillery shells.
Yep.
But, okay, let's think about this. If you are a strategic planner and you recognize that your biggest existential vulnerability is someone in Washington turning off the tap, your only logical defense is to make yourself impossible to isolate.
Right, you try to lock down an unbreakable contract.
So how are they actually moving right now to protect themselves from a future White House that might be skeptical of sending aid?
It's fascinating. They are executing a strategy of systemic entanglement.
Systemic entanglement.
Yeah. Recognizing the looming threat to their security strategy, leaders and their allies are pushing ambitious measures to deeply entrench themselves into the very machinery of America's defense industrial base and its intelligence community.
Wait, entrenching into the machinery, what is the actual mechanism for that? How does a smaller nation physically tie itself into a superpower's industrial base?
It happens through co-production and supply chain integration via must-pass U.S. defense bills. Fusing the systems means taking critical components of advanced military platforms, say targeting systems or avionics for U.S. fighter jets, and legally mandating that those components be jointly developed or manufactured with their facility.
Oh, I see. So if a future U.S. president gets frustrated and decides, hey, I want to instantly cut off military support, they suddenly realize they can't do it without also shutting down assembly lines in Ohio or Texas.
You've hit the nail on the head. If these provisions become deeply embedded in U.S. law, the relationship shifts from a discretionary partnership to a structural permanence.
That's wild.
It becomes too complex, too intertwined to easily sever. You don't just build a bigger shield. You tie your ship to America so tightly that they can't sink you without taking on water themselves.
That makes a ton of sense from a self-preservation standpoint, but moving from these hypothetical supply chain cutoffs to the practical reality sitting in Washington right now, we really have to look at the actual leverage on the table.
You do.
Because a 100% overnight cutoff of all aid makes for a fascinating thought experiment. But there are some massive political realities at play that make it, frankly, highly unlikely.
Yeah, you absolutely have to acknowledge the fraught assumptions underlying this entire scenario. First off, assuming a total U.S. withdrawal support assumes that Iran would simply pounce and start a full-scale regional war.
Right.
But we also have latest updates indicating Iran is simultaneously seeking a diplomatic peace deal with the United States to relieve its own economic sanctions. Geopolitics is rarely a straight line of aggression.
And then there's the domestic assumption in the U.S., which might be the biggest hurdle of all.
Oh, without a doubt. The scenario assumes that a U.S. administration, whether it's the incoming Trump administration or any future administration down the line, would actually be willing to fend off the immense pressure from influential pro-Israel voices.
And those voices hold significant sway, right? Across the U.S. government, within powerful think tanks, and throughout the media landscape.
Exactly. The political friction involved in a total cutoff is just astronomical.
So if you're listening to this and wondering how any U.S. president navigates that friction, it's really about finding the middle ground.
Yeah.
How could an administration, let's look at the incoming Trump administration, based on the latest updates, use this dynamic to exert pressure and shape the Middle East without actually resorting to the nuclear option of a total cutoff?
Oh, yeah.
Where is the hidden leverage?
Well, the real geostrategic maneuvering happens in the long-term contracts. There is a profoundly potent piece of leverage sitting on the table right now, and that's the negotiations over a new 10-year memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Israel.
Let's unpack that, because the Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, isn't something that makes headline news every day.
No, it's not.
But it's essentially the long-term baseline contract that subsidizes the military for a decade at a time. It's the guarantee of that $3.8 billion a year we mentioned at the start.
Exactly. And taking a hard line in those specific negotiations provides an administration with extraordinary leverage.
How so?
Short of abruptly cutting off emergency wartime aid, an administration can use the terms, the conditions, and the timelines of that future 10-year subsidy to press heavily. It's a slower turning of the financial valve, but it's incredibly effective.
So they use the promise of future security to dictate present behavior.
That's it. They could use the MOU negotiations to force them to wrap up the war in Lebanon, or to compel them to go along with a broader U.S. broker peace framework with Iran.
Wow.
There's no magic silver bullet to force a sovereign nation's hand overnight, but the leverage contained within a decade's worth of guaranteed military funding is immense. It forces leadership to choose between their immediate regional ambitions and the long-term survival of their military infrastructure.
So what does this all mean for the balance of power in the Middle East?
Yeah.
If we synthesize everything we've just unpacked, pulling the plug on U.S. aid wouldn't necessarily destroy Israel's fundamental security in the short term, because they do possess a highly capable domestic military and their own nuclear deterrent. But the geostrategic reality is that it would force a massive, painful recalibration.
It shifts them from a posture of regional power projection to a posture of strict territorial defense.
Yeah.
Without the logistical fuel and the diplomatic armor provided by Washington, they'd be forced to shrink their military footprint, pull back to their immediate borders, and abandon their capacity to run multi-front operations against adversaries abroad.
The expansionist capability relies entirely on that U.S. supply line.
Completely.
But here is a final provocative thought for you to consider, something that flips this entire dynamic completely upside down.
I love this part.
If they successfully execute this strategy of entrenching themselves directly into the U.S. defense industrial base through these must-pass congressional bills, if they successfully merge supply chains so deeply that cutting off aid means firing American defense workers, does America actually lose its own leverage over its ally?
It's a great question.
Right. Who really holds the ultimate power when two military systems become completely and totally inseparable? It's a fascinating geostrategic puzzle, and it's something to keep a close eye on as these funding measures move through Congress in the coming months. Thank you all for listening and watching today's deep dive. We invite you to check out our other podcasts for more clear, hype-free analysis. See you next time.